I drove 4.5 hours for family Thanksgiving, but what my mother said in front of everyone changed everything. At 29, I thought I understood what family meant. My career as a network technician was solid, my apartment in suburban Phoenix was my sanctuary, and despite the occasional drama, I believe blood ran thicker than water. But one devastating evening at Thanksgiving dinner, when my mother looked me dead in the eye and uttered words that would shatter everything I believed about unconditional love, I discovered just how wrong I'd been about the people who were supposed to cherish me most. Picture this, I'm driving 4.5 hours from Phoenix to my childhood home in Tucson, taking a precious vacation day because my mother had been guilt-tripping me since early October. "This is the first time everyone's going to be together in years," she'd said, her voice dripping with that familiar manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. "Your grandmother isn't getting any younger, and it would mean the world to have my son there." So like the dutiful son I'd always been, I caved, packed my overnight bag, and made that long desert drive, completely oblivious to the emotional ambush waiting for me. The moment I walked through that familiar front door, something felt different, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The house buzzed with its usual pre-dinner chaos. My Uncle Harrison was already commandeering the kitchen like he owned the place. My sister Sophia was glued to her phone at the granite counter, scrolling through whatever digital drama consumed her 24-year-old attention span, and my mother Catherine was orchestrating the controlled madness with her typical iron-fisted precision. Nothing seemed unusual, just the standard family circus I'd witnessed countless times before. But as the evening unfolded, I began noticing these subtle, almost imperceptible slights that made my stomach twist with unease. When my mother would ask if Sophia wanted something to drink, her voice carried this warm, nurturing tone. When she inquired if my cousin Isabella needed help with her bags, the same maternal sweetness flowed effortlessly. But when she passed by me, standing there in my pressed khakis and button-down shirt that I'd specifically chosen to look presentable for her precious family gathering, she simply walked right by as if I were invisible furniture. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was stressed about hosting 17 people for dinner. Maybe she was overwhelmed by the logistics of coordinating multiple generations under one roof. But deep in my gut, that familiar childhood feeling began creeping back, the one that whispered I was somehow fundamentally different, fundamentally less worthy of the warmth she showered on everyone else. When dinner was finally served, the great family shuffle began. We all migrated toward the dining room, and naturally, there weren't enough seats at the main table for everyone. Somehow, I found myself relegated to the corner, squeezed next to the old piano that hadn't been tuned since the Clinton administration, with Uncle Harrison breathing down my neck. Harrison, who I genuinely couldn't stand, with his loud opinions about everything and his need to be the center of attention at every family gathering. But I was determined to be the bigger person, to just eat my dry turkey, sip my wine, and avoid getting dragged into whatever political debate or family gossip was bound to explode. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't even there. Stories were shared, inside jokes were told, and laughter filled the room while I sat in my corner, mechanically chewing and nodding at appropriate intervals. Then, after the plates were cleared and everyone was settling into that post-meal contentment, my mother stood up with this theatrical flair she'd perfected over decades of being the family matriarch. "I want to take a moment to express how grateful I am for each of my special people," she announced, her voice carrying that saccharine sweetness she reserved for public displays of maternal devotion. "I have something small for each of you, just a little token of my appreciation for making this day so meaningful." She began distributing these carefully wrapped boxes, each one clearly personalized and thoughtful. Sophia unwrapped hers to find a beautiful silver bracelet with her birthstone, and the entire table erupted in appreciation. My father received this ridiculously expensive tie with his initials embroidered in gold thread, which everyone laughed about because he never wore ties unless forced. Uncle Harrison got some artisanal olive oil from Italy that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. There were scented candles with names engraved on them, coffee mugs with personal messages, and all sorts of thoughtful trinkets that spoke to hours of planning and consideration. I sat there watching this display of affection, genuinely happy for everyone but also feeling this growing knot in my chest. I kept thinking, okay, maybe she's saving mine for last. Maybe she wants to make it special. But as the gift-giving continued and the pile of wrapping paper grew higher, it became increasingly clear that there was nothing with my name on it. When she finally sat down, satisfied with her performance and basking in the gratitude of her recipients, I couldn't help myself. I looked directly at her, my voice barely above a whisper, and asked the most natural question in the world. "Is there one for me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. And then my mother, this woman who had carried me for 9 months, who had supposedly loved me unconditionally for 29 years, rolled her eyes in the most dismissive way imaginable and said words that will haunt me for the rest of my life. "Oh, please, you should be grateful we even let you sit at the table." I felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped my heart out with their bare hands. The room spun slightly, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. But before I could even process the devastating cruelty of what she just said, Uncle Harrison leaned over with this smug grin and delivered the final blow. "Be glad we still remember your name." The entire table erupted in laughter, not uncomfortable chuckles or nervous giggles, but genuine, hearty laughter like they'd just heard the funniest joke of their lives. Sophia was smirking behind her wine glass, my younger sister Maya was checking her phone like nothing had happened, my father was practically slapping his knee with amusement, and every single person in that room was having a grand old time at my expense. I just stared at my plate, feeling completely and utterly demolished. "Good to know," I managed to say, my voice barely audible over their continued laughter. Those 3 words were all I could muster as my entire understanding of family love crumbled around me like a house of cards in a hurricane. For the next 10 minutes, I sat there in stunned silence while they unwrapped their precious gifts and admired each other's thoughtfulness. The conversation resumed as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just publicly humiliated the son and nephew who had driven 4.5 hours to be there. Finally, I couldn't take another second. I stood up, mumbled something about not feeling well, and headed for the door. My mother followed me into the hallway, and I thought for one naive moment that maybe she was going to apologize, maybe she was going to acknowledge how cruel she'd been. Instead, she crossed her arms and demanded, "What's your problem, Marcus? Why do you always make everything about you?" The audacity was breathtaking. "You literally left me out," I replied, my voice shaking with hurt and anger. "How is that not about me?" She stepped closer, her face contorting with frustration. "You're too sensitive. You should be grateful you were even invited." And then, as if her words hadn't already cut deep enough, she slapped my arm, not hard enough to really hurt, but hard enough to make her point crystal clear. I pulled away from her, and she stormed into the bathroom, slamming the door so hard it rattled the family photos on the wall. That was it. That was the moment I realized I was done being their emotional punching bag. I grabbed my jacket and keys and walked out of that house without looking back. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody called after me. I sat in my Honda Civic in their driveway for a full minute, checking my phone for any message of concern or apology. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. As I scrolled through Instagram during that surreal moment, I saw that Sophia had already posted photos of herself and Maya opening their gifts, both of them beaming with happiness. The caption read something about being blessed with the most thoughtful family. I started that 4.5 hour drive home in complete emotional numbness, barely remembering most of the journey. When I finally reached my apartment, I heated up some instant ramen and sat in my living room in complete darkness, replaying every moment of that devastating evening. What had I done to deserve such treatment? I'd paid my way through college without asking for a dime. I'd moved out and built my own life without being a burden. I never asked them for anything, yet somehow the more independent I became, the more they seemed to resent me. The next day, I called my friend River, who I've known since high school, and told him the whole story. His response was immediate and unequivocal. "Dude, that's not normal. You know that, right?" Those words stuck with me because they forced me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding for years. This wasn't just family being family. This was systematic emotional abuse disguised as humor. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I was done playing along with their twisted dynamic. I was done pretending to be part of a family that only wanted me around as their designated target for jokes and their invisible ATM for bills they couldn't be bothered to pay themselves. What I discovered next about the extent of their financial manipulation would make my Thanksgiving humiliation look like child's play. For years, I'd been quietly covering expenses for them, thinking I was being helpful, thinking I was being a good son and nephew. But as I started examining my bank statements with fresh eyes, I realized I'd been systematically exploited. The family phone plan that I'd been paying for everyone because they claimed they couldn't figure out autopay. My mother's car insurance that was mysteriously auto-drafted from my checking account because she couldn't navigate the app. Random Venmo requests for groceries, Home Depot runs, and even my grandmother's delivery services. I'd been the family's secret safety net for years, and they'd repaid my generosity by making me their public laughingstock. So I stopped. Just like that, I canceled everything. No dramatic announcements, no ultimatums. I simply removed my payment information from every account and let them figure out their own adult responsibilities for once. The reaction was swift and predictable. First came the confused phone calls. "Hey, did you change the insurance?" my mother asked, trying to sound casual. When I told her she'd have to handle it herself, the mask slipped completely. She called me selfish, ungrateful, and a dozen other things before hanging up. Sophia sent a text asking if I could just chill for a bit because mom was freaking out about the bills. I replied with 2 words, "Not my circus." Maya tried calling multiple times, but I let every call go to voicemail. Then Uncle Harrison called, which was absolutely unprecedented since he'd never contacted me for anything that didn't involve me helping him move furniture. "You know your mother is having a hard time," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're making things worse for everyone." I actually laughed out loud. Maybe she should have thought of that before making me the family joke at Thanksgiving dinner. He called me ungrateful and hung up. He called back immediately and left a rambling voicemail about how I wasn't man enough to handle family responsibilities. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. The family group chat exploded with accusations and guilt trips. My father claimed he couldn't afford the phone bill, which was rich considering he'd just bought a brand new fishing boat. My mother threatened to call my bank and tell them I was being financially abusive, which made absolutely no sense. Sophia posted passive-aggressive Facebook statuses about selfish people ruining the holidays, and Maya shared memes about family loyalty. But the most revealing moment came when I saw a screenshot that Maya had posted in another group chat asking if anyone knew how to set up autopay for a phone bill. She was literally crowdsourcing basic adult skills because she'd never had to be responsible for anything in her life. 2 weeks into my financial independence, my grandmother called from her landline, which she only used for emergencies. Her voice was thin and worried as she asked if I was okay, explaining that my mother had been crying about me and the whole family was concerned. "I'm fine, Grandma," I told her. "I'm just tired of being treated like an afterthought." "Well, that's just how your mother is," she replied with the same enabling tone I'd heard my entire life. "You know she likes things her way." "Maybe it's time someone else gets to have things their way for a change," I said gently. She sighed and changed the subject to asking if I was eating enough and taking care of myself, the usual grandmother concerns that actually felt genuine. Maya eventually sent a text apologizing for Thanksgiving, claiming she didn't want to get involved. When I pointed out that laughing at someone's humiliation was very much getting involved, she asked when she could be part of the family for real instead of just the entertainment. She never answered. For about 2 weeks, there was an eerie calm. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message and would either apologize or leave me alone. But I should have known better. My family never does anything halfway when it comes to drama. The storm began building again when my father started complaining about me at his regular bar, telling anyone who would listen that I thought I was too good for my raising, now that I had a decent job. Uncle Harrison apparently told his entire bowling league that I was cutting myself off from the family because I couldn't handle a joke. Then my mother made the first of what would become several unannounced visits to my apartment building. The front desk called to tell me I had a visitor, and when I looked out my window, there she was, standing in the parking lot with her arms crossed, looking absolutely furious. I didn't go down to meet her. She waited 15 minutes before leaving, then sent a text that simply said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The thing that struck me most during this period was their complete inability to understand what they'd done wrong. Every conversation, every text, every guilt trip was about how my actions were affecting them. Never once did anyone acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, publicly humiliating someone at a family dinner wasn't acceptable behavior. They didn't want me back as a son or nephew or family member. They wanted their ATM back. They wanted their designated target back. They wanted someone to absorb their cruelty so they could feel better about themselves without having to examine their own behavior. But I was done being their emotional and financial safety net. For the first time in my adult life, I was breathing my own air, making my own decisions, and prioritizing my own well-being. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. The final confrontation came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I least expected it. I was lounging on my couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I noticed several missed calls from Maya. Before I could even check the voicemails, I heard the unmistakable sound of aggressive pounding on the front entrance of my building. I looked out my window and felt my stomach drop. There, parked illegally in the fire lane, was my parents' silver Toyota Camry. Standing at the front door like they were about to storm a fortress were my mother, my father, and incredibly, Uncle Harrison. All three of them had their arms crossed and wore expressions of barely contained rage. The building intercom buzzed, and suddenly they were all yelling into the speakers simultaneously. "We need to talk. Open up. This is serious." Their voices overlapped in a cacophony of demands and accusations. I didn't respond. I just watched from my fourth-floor window as they continued their assault on the building's entrance. My neighbor River texted me, "You got a whole squad at your door. Want me to call security?" "Nah," I replied. "Let's see how long it takes for them to get tired." But of course, this was my family we were talking about. They had unlimited stamina when it came to drama, especially when they felt their control slipping away. After 5 solid minutes of yelling, some poor resident finally buzzed them in, probably just to stop the noise. Then they were at my door, pounding with such force that my entire apartment seemed to shake. I put my headphones on for a moment, trying to center myself for whatever was about to happen. Through the noise, I could hear my mother's voice, shrill and demanding, "Marcus, open this door right now. You can't just ignore us forever." My father tried to sound authoritative. "We drove 4.5 hours for this. You owe us a conversation." Uncle Harrison was muttering in the background about what happens when you let kids run wild, as if I were still 12 years old instead of a grown man with my own life and responsibilities. I waited another minute, collecting myself, then opened the door just a crack. "What do you want?" My mother immediately tried to push past me, but I blocked her path with my foot. She actually hit my arm, not hard enough to cause real damage, but definitely hard enough to make her point. My father looked apoplectic, his face flushed red with anger, and he tried to muscle his way past me as well. "We're not doing this inside," I said firmly, standing my ground. "If you want to talk, we do it in the hallway." River had poked his head out of his apartment door and was watching the entire spectacle unfold. Other neighbors were starting to peer out as well, drawn by the commotion. My mother launched into her prepared speech without missing a beat. "You're ruining this family. You're making everything about money. Your grandmother has been crying for weeks. How could you do this to us?" My father picked up where she left off. "You think you're better than us now, don't you? Just because you moved out and pay your own bills, you think you can cut us off and embarrass us in front of everyone." Uncle Harrison stepped forward, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "You always were the problem, Marcus. Always causing issues, never grateful for what you had." I just stood there and let them exhaust themselves with their rehearsed grievances. When they finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly and clearly. "You all drove 4.5 hours to tell me I'm a disappointment because I stopped letting you use me as your punchline and your ATM. Don't you dare make us out to be the villains," my mother snapped. "You're the one who walked away from your family." "I walked away," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "because you literally told me I should be grateful just to sit at your table." What kind of family says that to someone they supposedly love? My father's voice got even louder. "You're twisting everything. You know your mother didn't mean it. You've always been too sensitive." "No," I said, meeting his glare directly. "I'm just done pretending it's normal. You want my help? Pay me back what you owe. You want me to show up to family events? Treat me like I actually matter, not just when you need something or want someone to laugh at." My mother tried to slap my arm again, but this time I was ready. I caught her wrist gently but firmly. "Don't do that." She jerked her hand away and slammed her purse against the wall in frustration. Uncle Harrison stepped closer, invading my personal space in a clear attempt at intimidation. "You need to grow up. Family comes first." I looked him dead in the eye without flinching. "Maybe you should tell that to the people who raised me." He actually shoved my shoulder, and without even thinking about it, I pushed him back. It wasn't aggressive or violent, just a clear boundary being set. By now, several neighbors were openly watching, and someone down the hall was recording the entire confrontation on their phone. My father saw the phone and tried to get everyone to lower their voices, but my mother was already crying, her carefully applied makeup starting to run. "This is all your fault," she wailed. "I can't believe you would do this to your own mother. I can't believe you would show up at my door and expect me to just take it like I always have," I replied. That's when Maya called my phone. I answered it and put it on speaker without thinking. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Mom said you were being violent." "You're on speaker," I told her. "Tell them what you told me last week about how you wish they would stop making me the family villain." The line went completely silent. My mother tried to grab the phone from me, but I held it out of her reach. My father attempted to slam my door shut, but I blocked it with my foot. "This is ridiculous," Uncle Harrison declared. "Let's go." He stormed off toward the stairwell, his footsteps echoing angrily in the hallway. My mother stood there for another moment, breathing heavily, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Then she said, with venom I'd never heard from her before, "You'll regret this, Marcus." Maybe, I replied calmly. But I won't regret standing up for myself. My father finally released the door and followed Uncle Harrison, muttering under his breath about ungrateful children. My mother lingered for just a second longer, looking like she wanted to say something else, then grabbed her purse and stormed off, slamming the stairwell door behind her. I stood there in my doorway for a full minute, my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. River texted me, "You good?" "Yeah," I replied. "Actually better than I felt in a long time." I didn't get any more calls at night. I saw on Facebook that my mother had posted some long, rambling status about how family is complicated and how some people don't understand unconditional love. Sophia had commented, "Love you, Mom. You're the strongest person I know," and Maya had shared the post with crying emojis. But I wasn't chasing anyone anymore. I wasn't explaining myself or defending my decisions or trying to make them understand. I had made my point as clearly as possible, and now they would have to live with the consequences of their choices. The beautiful thing about standing up for yourself is that once you do it, once you prove to yourself that you can survive without their approval, their power over you completely evaporates. They could cry, scream, guilt trip, and manipulate all they wanted, but they couldn't make me go back to being their doormat. 3 decades of life had taught me that family isn't just about shared blood. It's about respect, kindness, and genuine care for each other's well-being. If someone can't provide those basic human courtesies, then biology becomes irrelevant. I hope they remember that 4.5 hour drive home and every minute they spent pounding on my door, demanding that I return to a dynamic that only benefited them. I hope they think about it every time they have to figure out their own bills, every time they need someone to mock at family gatherings, every time they realize that unconditional love has to flow in both directions. At 29, I finally learned the most valuable lesson. You teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop accepting the unacceptable. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard.